Welcome everybody. My name is Molly Mayfield. I'm a support specialist here at RockWare. Thank you for attending this webinar today. This is the first installment in a series of discussions of the import and export tools in RockWorks. During the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be discussing how to get data into and out of the Borehole Manager database via Excel. And here are the topics which we're going to cover. Just a real quick discussion of creating a new project and manually entering borehole records. Quick run through, very quick, about the Borehole Manager data import tools. Talking about the Excel bulk import format, show you how to import the data. Talk about the Excel import format for single tables and show you how to import those. We've muted all of you for practical purposes, but if you have questions, please type them into the GoToMeeting chat box and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. Hopefully at the beginning of your work in the RockWorks program, you spent a little bit of time working with the samples project that's installed with the program. We have a number of tutorials that address this project data, and it's a good basic project to get you started in the program. After that, let's go through the steps you take to create a new project and enter borehole data for your own work. A project in RockWorks consists of a folder where RockWorks creates a borehole database, which is an MDB file, with the same name as the folder. For example, if you create a project folder named Colorado 1, then the program will automatically create a new blank database in that folder named colorado1.mdb. The project folder is also where your grid models, solid models, 2D and 3D diagrams, and other project files are stored. Each project also has its own set of menu settings and customized database dictionaries or layouts. These are stored in a system subfolder inside the project folder, and the program also creates automatically. To create a new project in RockWorks15, you simply select the Project New menu option. And I'll show you how this looks in the program itself. Just go to the Project New menu option. And the first thing to do is to browse to the folder on your computer inside which the new project will be created. And I usually create all of mine in my RockWorks15 data folder. And with that selected, I just click Make New Folder. I type a folder name and click OK. Unless otherwise necessary, it's best just to select the system defaults here. However, note that if you've done a lot of work customizing another project in RockWorks, you can pattern your new project based on that. So any customization of data tables, and you can even bring in all of the data or specific data types from the other project. But for now, we're just going to choose System Defaults. RockWorks will create an MDB file with the same name as this project folder, and then you'll see the Borehole Manager window. Once you have your project created, you can start entering the borehole data. And one option is to enter the borehole records one by one manually. Use the File New Borehole menu option to create each new borehole record manually, hand typing in the required fields. And I'll show you how this looks. File, New Borehole, just type in a name, such as this, type in an easting, and a northing, oops. And an elevation, and a total depth, and click OK. Once the record is created, as it is now, you can enter additional data, location data in these fields, and you can even create custom fields. You can right-click on this location table, go to Choose Optional Fields. This shows us our location fields, the required fields, the optional fields, and I'm going to create a new field here. And I'm going to call this Status. Oops. And I can choose the field type. And I click OK and click OK. It updates my database now with this new location field right there. And I'll say active. So that's how you enter borehole data manually, and then you can import or copy paste or whatever, hand type in data to the other data tables. But it becomes fairly obvious fairly quickly that this is a very tedious way to enter your data. And so another option is to import the borehole location from an external source. And realistically, because different types of data often come from different sources, you'll probably use a combination of hand entering some data and importing other data from a variety of different data sources using a combination of the available tools. The File Import menu in the Borehole Manager is used for importing data that's not limited to a single data type. In other words, you can bring in location data and lithology data and P data or any combination. And the File Import menu contains a number of import tools. I'm going to run through these just really quickly. The ADO import is used to import from an acquired database or from any MDB or MySQL database that has an ADO driver. It's flexible and it's very powerful, and we'll address that in another webinar. The ASCII import behaves much like the Excel import we'll be discussing here, only that the data is stored in text files rather than Excel worksheets. The GINT import brings data in from the GINT software program via a correspondence file. The GDS import brings in Geological Data Services format files into the borehole database. The IHS tool brings in IHS Energy Group's 297 well data format files. The Kansas Geological Survey import brings KGS well and TOPS files into the database, and there's actually a how-to video on this import on our website and on YouTube. The LAS brings in Canadian Well Logging Society curve data files, either single or in bulk. If you're a logplot user, you can bring your DAT files into the database. The penetrometer option brings in soil compaction data. These three lower ones are old RockWorks data format, RockWare data format imports. The Tobin option brings in well coordinate service data into the database. And then finally, Excel is probably the most commonly used import in the program. And that is the bulk import tool we'll be discussing now. This import can be used to bring in locations or locations plus any other downhole data from multiple worksheets in an Excel file. And the structure of this bulk Excel import file is the same as what results from exporting an existing project to Excel. And this is really, really important. So if you went away there for a moment, I'll say it again. The structure of the Excel import file is the same as what you get when you export an existing RockWorks project to Excel. Here's an example of the data from the Samples project folder installed with RockWorks and how its Excel export looks. And you can refer to this example file, which is also installed with the program, or you can export one of your own existing projects to serve as a template for importing data for other projects. Each worksheet in the Excel file corresponds to a RockWorks project data table. And let me bring up an Excel example. So here's this file that we were looking at. And so, for example, the location worksheet here can record data for import into the location table. The orientation worksheet brings data into the orientation table, lithology into the lithology table, and so forth. The location worksheet is probably the most important one since it creates the borehole records and defines their locations. There's some flexibility in the layout of the location worksheet, though the following fields are required: the borehole ID, the easting, the northing, the elevation, and the total depth. You have to have those. If you don't know, say, total depth at the time of import, you can enter zeros or 100s or something for all of the values. You just have to have something entered. And there are tools in the program itself, once the data is imported, to adjust the elevations based on a grid or to adjust the total depths based on the borehole data extents. Bring that location table up here. And the columns in this worksheet can be in any order. And you can have lots of additional information if you like, which the import can use or it can ignore as you wish. For example, these two columns are not standard RockWorks location table columns, but there's no problem importing this data into RockWorks. The column headings themselves can be named anything you like. However, if you use our standard names, then RockWorks will map them or understand them automatically. The other worksheets structures are pretty much fixed. So the orientation table, for example, needs to be listed in this order: borehole ID, depth, azimuth, and inclination. The lithology worksheet, for example, has to have borehole ID in the first column, the depth intervals, depth 1, depth 2, and the lithology type. Stratigraphy similarly. For data types that have multiple columns in RockWorks, such as P data or I data, this is the format that must be followed. Borehole ID in the first column, the type in the second, and for this case P data, the depth, and then the value. So if you have multiple components, you're going to have a very long list. You have first drill hole 1 gamma measurements, then drill hole 1 resistivity measurements, then drill hole 2 gamma measurements, and so forth. And if you don't have your data in this format, there is another format you can use, and we're going to go over that in a little bit. It's important for this type of data, though, to sort first by borehole ID, then by data type. So, and I'm not going to go through the detail in great detail of the data structures. I would recommend that you look at the Excel template in the samples folder to see the required layout. The worksheet names themselves can be whatever you like, but if you choose those of the templates, the standard names, then RockWorks will be able to map them automatically, and you'll see this in a minute. And actually, to show you the effects of having a different name, I'm going to click on this interval table and actually rename it to something different so you can see how I actually map it during import. And I'll save that change. Each table in the RockWorks database can have its own worksheet in Excel. You can have as few or as many as you want, and you can map as many or as few as you want. Okay, so once you have your import worksheet set up, let's walk through the steps you take to import the data. So in RockWorks, I go to the File menu, and I choose Import, where this long list of options is, and then I choose Excel. When prompted whether to back up the database, I generally suggest yes, unless it's blank. So it will back up this database, and it saves backups in your project folder. So here's my RockWorks15 data, Golden Project, and it creates a backup folder with a zip file. And each backup you create will be, this number will be incremented. The first step is to browse for the name of the Excel file you want to import. So I'm going to browse to my field data listing and choose this file. It will open it automatically and scan it. If it doesn't, you can click this Open File button to have it do so. The location data gets set up in this first table, and here are the fields from my input file. And because they had the sort of expected names, RockWorks was able to assign them the appropriate database fields automatically. In fact, it even found my status spreadsheet column. It mapped automatically to my status field that we just created in the database. It doesn't yet know, however, this driller column. It doesn't know what to do with it. So I can just create a new field on the fly here, and it will add this to my database, and we can import right there. Next, we click on the Block Selection tab to tell RockWorks which of the other worksheets we want to import at this time. Again, any recognized worksheet names, which are listed here, will be automatically associated with the corresponding database table. And any unrecognized ones, such as this geotech worksheet, which I renamed, will show up here. So to now associate this geotech table with my iData or interval data table, I just have to drag it over. Anything you don't want to import at this time, just unassociate it. So RockWorks now knows that it's supposed to ignore all the lithology data in that worksheet. You can import as many or as few of the tables as you want. If they don't contain any data, that's fine. If you ever want to start over from scratch, just click Clear Import Blocks, and all of these block types will be moved back over to the Available Blocks section. And finally, and this is really important, we need to tell RockWorks what to do if a borehole that's listed in the Excel sheet already exists in the database. In this case, in my example, this is a new import of new holes. However, you can use this tool to append to existing data. So these overwrite options are really important. In this window, the skip existing record tells the program that if it sees data for borehole A in the Excel sheet and borehole A already exists in the database, to skip the import of that borehole entirely. The Excel data for borehole A is just ignored. The Create New Record option tells the program that if it sees data for borehole A in the Excel sheet and borehole A already exists in the database, to import all of the data under a new borehole name, borehole A_1. After import, you'll have the original borehole data and the new borehole A1 data. Replace Existing Record tells RockWorks that if borehole A exists in the database, to delete all of the existing data for that hole and replace it with the Excel data. That means the original borehole record will be completely replaced, so be sure about this. You can activate a warning down here at the bottom of the window, which is recommended, and that way the program will display a confirmation window for any existing holes it finds during import, so you have the choice to replace, update, skip, or create a new record on a hole-by-hole basis. And finally, and this may be the most commonly one used, Update Existing Record tells RockWorks that if borehole A exists in the database, the importer will not do any initial deletions. Instead, it will just add new record types from Excel to the borehole. However, any existing data types will be replaced. So let's say borehole A already exists in the project with location and lithology data. During the import from Excel, you now map only stratigraphy data for import. Then this new data type is simply appended to the project, and borehole A will now have location data, lithology, and stratigraphy data. Note, though, that during this import process, if you map lithology data for import as well, then the existing lithology data will be replaced with the new. You can't append to an existing data type. You can only append to new data types. And for tables that have multiple columns like iData, tData, and pData, an existing data type refers to specific tracks. So you actually can import new track names to an existing table. Okay, so then the next step is just to click OK to go ahead and import the data. I'm going to choose Update Existing Record. So RockWorks will import the data from Excel into the borehole manager using the mappings that you've specified. A record will be created for each borehole, and any data listed in the accessory worksheets which reference that hole will be imported into the tables. And once the data's come in, then RockWorks has to scan all of the records and compute the XYZ values for every downhole data point. And it stores that in the background in the database. I'm not going to scan for project dimensions because I already have them defined here. So now we've got our data. And if you can click, all the data's been brought in for all of the different holes. Okay, let's say now that you've used the bulk export to bring in your new project, bring into your new project the borehole locations and the downhole data like we saw here. Now you receive from the lab a whole new set of chemistry data that you need to get into the database. And you can do this with a different Excel import program which imports for single tables only. Here's an example of how this kind of data might look, and this may be a very common format that people get. Each row in the spreadsheet is for a single borehole, and it has multiple columns of measurements. And this particular example is time-based data. It has the borehole ID, a sample date, a top and a base of an interval, and then listings for multiple components. So this is a very different layout than we used in the bulk Excel import for T-data, and this is probably a more common layout that you'll get. So there's no problem. There's a tool for this, and we'll walk through this import to append this new data to our existing database. You can use the import option in the T-data menu, T-data import Excel, to import this data directly into the T-data table in RockWorks. And I'll show you how to do that. So I go to T-data, import, and it does require that the borehole records already exist in the database, so you can only append this data to existing borehole records. And yep, I'll go ahead and back up again. My backup increment counter went to project 01. And here's my T-data spreadsheet import window, and it's going to look very much the same for T-data, iData, iText, P-data, and P-text. So now I'm going to browse back to my field data folder for my chemistry spreadsheet. And here are my input columns names from my spreadsheet. And the only name it's been able to associate automatically is my borehole ID. And that's because I don't have any of these columns yet defined in my database. So I can just quickly click on my type table to create my T-data types right now on the fly. So I can set up arsenic, and cadmium, and chromium. And if you want to put in min-max values and units and descriptions, you can do that for your own reference. RockWorks isn't going to do anything with those. But now I have my column names defined for my data tables. Now I just have to tell RockWorks which goes where. Cadmium, chromium. My date goes to my sample date, depth 1, depth 2, lead, and toluene. So now my import columns have a place to go in the database. You can import for multiple holes or single holes. If I only had one borehole listed, I could check this box. I can multiply my depths if there's a mismatch between feet and meters between the project database and the spreadsheet, and I can assign a default date for my time data here. So now I'm all set up. I just click OK. It brings the data in. It updates my XYZ values, and I now will have my time-based data in my data sheet. So now here are all my T-data measurements. This particular sample only has one measurement per hole, but you can certainly bring in many, many measurements per hole from that flat spreadsheet. And that's actually it for this session. I just want to show you the two different import, the bulk import and the flat import. If anybody has any questions at this time, I'm happy to answer questions in the chat box. Let's see, I'm not seeing any, let's see. Let's see, no questions? Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions, I will, we'll go ahead and end the meeting. We will post a recording of this session on YouTube and on the RockWare website. We'll send out a link to you all. And if you have any questions, just contact our support line. And hope you have a great day. Thanks for joining us.